This is WCPN, Cleveland.
I have a feeling about Miles because of those records that we had something there that really never happened again, and he's just so great, and I really had a wonderful opportunity to let people hear that, and now you can hear it better than ever. Get a CD and did a pretty good job on the remastering on that one. I mean, it took a lot to mess that up, and so it sounds pretty good, and I mean, those things really, I can sit back and listen to those and just feel good. If I Were a Bell, you know that record?
Yes, relaxing.
Yeah, relaxing, right. I like the Walking record with hard silver solo on it. Oh, gee, a lot of good. Just thinking about it now makes me feel good. Either that, the air conditioning is working.
He's certainly not a household name, yet any true jazz fan or avid reader of album liner notes has more than once heard of or seen the name Rudy Van Gelder. During the past 30 years, the engineer's custom studio in Englewood Cliffs, New Jersey, has been host to thousands of musicians and scores of recording sessions. I'm Chris Hovan, and welcome to a special edition of Milestones, featuring an exclusive interview with master engineer Rudy Van Gelder from his studio in New Jersey. During the next hour, we'll discuss the musicians, producers, and techniques involved in producing much of the classic jazz recordings of the 50s and 60s. And of course, we'll also hear examples of the sound that is uniquely and distinctively the work of Rudy Van Gelder. You can feel it as you walk through the doorway, the spirit of John Coltrane or Wes Montgomery hovering atop the pointed cathedral ceiling of Van Gelder's Englewood Cliffs studio. You can almost hear the music as Rudy opens the door and welcomes you into the control booth. History abounds here. All the blue notes were done here, Coltrane's later work for Impulse, and countless CTI dates with Chet Baker, Paul Desmond, and Stanley Turrentine, just to name a few. Through the kind assistance of new note producer Dennis Sullivan and his associate William Reed, Rudy granted us his first interview since his appearance on NPR's Sidran on Record. Reed and I found the engineer to be incredibly warm, amiable, and ready to talk about the jazz legacy that he has been a major part of. To begin our discussion, I asked Rudy if jazz was his favorite form of music and how his interest in audio recording developed.
Jazz is my favorite music, right? And I started when I was a kid, many years ago, listening to the music of that time and playing it a little bit too. I used to play trumpet, in high school days, right? I didn't play it too well, but that's what I did. And it was a combination of that and the interest in the technical part of it. And both of those things grew, and as time went on, I ended up doing it professionally.
Was there you were an eye doctor?
Optometrist, right,
yeah.
Right, that's right. That was my formal education. I went to school to study that. But I was recording before that. As a matter of fact, while I was in school, while I was in college, I used to do remotes in Philadelphia, bring a disc recorder and go down to clubs and record and things like that. Sure, I was interested really right back from the beginning, since I was a teenager.
Rudy's fascination with the art of recording culminated in the formation of a home studio, where he would record at night after work and on the weekends. This was the famous Hackensack studio, utilized during the mid-40s and 1950s.
Yeah, well, my folks at that time were building a house, and they allowed me to set up a space where I could indulge in the recording, in the hobby of recording. And that's what I did that for many years. And I want to get the chronology right. First, it was just play, just recording for my own amazement and trying to see how the gadgets work, and building my own equipment too. I mean, in those days you couldn't buy mixers and consoles. You had to construct everything yourself, and that's how I started into the technical part. And it really got a good foundation in how those things work. And they didn't work too well either most of the time. But so I did that, and constantly trying to improve it, as I still am. And that happened from the time that we moved into that house that my parents had built up till the time I came here, which was in late 59, early 1960. That was the time that we finished this place in Englewood Cliffs, where we are now.
As producer Michael Cascuna has noted, by 1959, Rudy must have felt that he needed more than 2 hours sleep a night, so he closed his optometry practice and moved to Englewood Cliffs, where he broke ground on a custom home and studio. Oddly enough, the first recording session at the new Englewood Cliffs location was not a jazz date.
The first session was the West Point Glee Club. Believe it or not, a totally non-jazz organization. I was working at that time for a classical company called Vox Records, and I was doing a lot of their recording and a lot of their mastering. Tapes that were made in Europe used to come to me, and I would cut the lacquers for release in this country. I did that for 10 years for that company. But then there was a little sprinkle of actual recording, which I did for them. Society-type piano players and string quartets every now and then. And the producer had the inspiration to record the West Point Choir, which was I did up at West Point. You know what West Point is, right? I presume, or where it is. And it's up the river here, up the Hudson River, not too far from here, actually. And he wanted to do the Glee Club. I think there was a choir and a Glee Club. And one of them, I think it was the choir. One I did up in the chapel in West Point, and another that came here. And that happened to be the first date that we did here. And there were some other things. They wanted to get into some gospel recording, which they did. I did one session here. And then, of course, the jazz thing started. But I was recording not only for Blue Note in those days, I was recording for Savoy Records, for Prestige, because I had done a lot of records in Hackensack for Prestige. So we made the transition from Hackensack to here in Englewood Cliffs in late 59, early 60. Well, the clients really needed two things. They needed space, as you say. They really they wanted to do larger groups. Of course, I was limited in Hackensack. Actually, I did Gil Evans there. A small orchestra had about 10 or 12 in Hackensack. But there was always a pressure to do more. Larger groups, and I needed a bigger space. And we were doing, whenever a session came along that required a lot of space, we would do it as a remote. We'd go into New York City and do it, and I did a lot of, a lot of Jimmy Smith recording there. I was at the Manhattan Tower. I don't know if you know about, you probably know more about those records than I do. So, and there was a nice sounding place. And so when anything big was required, I would do that in New York. And of course, that has limitations. You really do the best in your own place. At least I do. I feel that way. So I designed this place, and we finished it in 1960. And in addition to that, it was a question of time. They wanted to do sessions at night, starting at 8 o'clock at night, and record till whenever. And most of the record companies, not all of them, but most of them wanted to do that. So I had to obviously get out of the house. I mean, that was ridiculous. I was just taking it away from my parents, and it was just the wrong thing to do to stay there, So, found the land here, and we built the building, which is pretty much as you see it now. We've added a few things, but basically it's as it was then.
Anyone remotely familiar with the jazz scene during the 50s and 60s knows of the large quantity of music produced during those years, and Van Gelder was never lacking for business. Savoy, Prestige, Blue Note, and Impulse kept him busy on a daily basis, either recording, editing, or mastering their products.
So a typical day would be the phone would ring, and someone would want to do a session. Savoy would want to come in and do a date, and Blue Note wanted to come and do another session at a different day. So it got to the point, and I was still working for Vox, so I had to cut masters that came from Austria and places like that, and Germany, and it really got to be more than I could handle. So I had to make a decision as to whether to hire somebody and really make a big thing out of it, or just stay small and do everything myself. And I felt that I was more comfortable doing things on my own. And So I sort of, here's what happened. Because there weren't enough hours in a day to keep everybody happy, and it was just myself, I didn't have multiple studios, what I would do is I would give each client a particular day of the week. For example, Monday would be Prestige, Tuesday would be Savoy, Wednesday would be Vox, Thursday would be Blue Note, Friday would be another Blue Note, and then there'd be other miscellaneous things in there. So each client had their own regular day, so they didn't have to worry about what to book the time. They booked what they wanted, and they knew that the time would always be available to them. So that worked out very well, and that went on for years like that. And shortly after that, Savoy dropped out, so that opened up 2 more days, and then Vox went in there, and then after they dropped out, someone else went in there. So that was a good system. There was so much activity. It was really a golden age of music in those years, if you both know, you know. So there was so much activity that even if someone didn't show up on a date or they didn't have any recording, they would come in and do the mastering part. They'd edit it, put it together, like if there was a Red Garland trio or something that we had to put together. We'd spend the morning doing that and then do a date in the afternoon. So it was really regular people. And you know, the nice thing happens when it's like that, particularly as far as the musicians are concerned. They get used to coming into the studio. And, you know, a lot of people think it's better to go into the club to record to get the real feeling of the music, you know. But when a musician comes into a studio regularly, all that falls away, and all they think about is the music. They don't know they're in a studio. They just worry about the music, if they're here often enough. If they do enough dates, enough sessions, and then the companies, they would make various combinations of musicians, you know, different, same drummer with different horn players, different drummer with same horn players, that sort of thing, you know. And that went on for a long, long time. We made a lot of great records, really great, and I enjoyed it. It was terrific. And meanwhile, that gave me an opportunity to try to improve things, and I would be studying how to do this or trying things. And I'd try it on one company, and then if it was okay, I'd try it on the next date. I did a lot of that stuff, you know. I'd try a microphone and see if that thing sounded any good, you know, or if there was a problem with something not working right. Well, let me try that on a Prestige date. If it works okay, then I'll use that for Blue Note when they come in Friday, you know. That was the way it was. That's the way my mind was working through all that time. A long time.
Of course, the success of any recording session lies not only in the talents of the engineer and the musicians involved, but in the guidance of a like-minded and compatible producer. It is his responsibility to dictate what kind of music will be played and how it will ultimately sound. Though Van Gelder has an instantly recognizable sound that is truly his own, it can also take on a chameleon-like character depending upon the label and its producer. And obviously every producer has his own approach.
Some producers stay out of it. They don't get involved. They hire the musicians that they want. They say, okay, you do it. If it sounds good, it's yours. If it doesn't sound good, it's still yours. You know, that would be one guy's attitude. And others really wanted to get on top of things and make sure, because they had an idea even before they came in here what they wanted this record to sound. Other people sort of would let it happen. They'd come in and, okay, we'll see what happens today, you know, particularly with jazz musicians. And it's not to say that one is better than the other. You know, I really don't feel that one has an advantage over the other. Now, of course, the fate of these companies, as they have been dispersed into the hands of other people, has mixed results. You know what I mean by that.
Right.
So it's hard to look at that in the light of what has happened to the product. That is, you know, into whose hands has fallen all this tremendous artistic effort that all these wonderful musicians have made through the years. Where is it now? You know, who owns this record? Who owns that record? You know, and if you to be exposed to that now, you really sort of it's being modified by the structure of the companies that now own it. Now own that music. I have to be a little careful how I say this, you know, but I'm sure you know what I mean.
Yes.
So, yes, just as now, there's differences in the reissues. Some of them are quite conscientious. Some of them are very good about it. Some just throw everything out the way it is. It's reflected in the engineering people who handle it. I do very little of that, by the way, you know, because now they have their own staff of engineers who do nothing but that, you know, and who knows where. So the difference in the sound, I really don't want to say it's something that I did. Yet I had certain feelings about how the music should sound, and there's a thread running through all those, I guess, if you can hear that, of similarity. You can sort of recognize things that I do, but yet there are differences in it, and I feel that that's what I try to accomplish. For different companies to come here and make every record sound the same, I don't think that's the right thing to do. I want to reflect the personality of the company. I still feel that way. And some guys come in, and if it sounds great, it's luck, you know. Others work at it.
Although Rudy engineered most of the major jazz recordings to the 50s and 60s for many record labels, he maintains that the Rudy Van Gelder sound is something that would not have happened without Blue Note producer Alfred Lion. Rudy would also work very closely with Bob Thiele of Impulse and the ultimate A&R man, Creed Taylor, during the 60s and 70s. So I asked him to describe each individual's approach to the art of production.
Alfred Lion was one that really had a preconceived idea as to what he wanted. He knew what he wanted before he came to the studio. He had rehearsed his people, and when they came in here, they were ready. And it was difficult for me because I was sort of lagging behind always, Alfred, and they knew what they wanted. Alfred knew what he wanted. Frank knew what he wanted. The musicians were prepared to a higher degree than other people, and I had to really sort of catch up to make sure that I could deliver to them what they were here for. I would say that characterizes Alfred. Bob Thiele was totally the opposite. He's laid back, hires the musicians because he respects them and likes the music, and he sort of doesn't interfere. There are many sessions he wasn't even here. He wasn't even present on a lot of these days. And so he was just the opposite. He was not a take charger. He was a laid back, let's see what happens. And many great things happened that way. Actually, he made one of my absolute favorite records, the Johnny Hartman, John Coltrane, you know. And Bob Thiele made that record, and I just love that record. That's one of my favorites of all time. And that's a laid-back producer, and there's a lot of merit to that. Of course, you know about the Blue Note history, and that's the other approach. That's Alfred Lion's approach. Let's get this right. Let's make sure it's cooking. You got the right feeling that you all want to have. I don't want you to be disappointed. You're going to have to live with this record the rest of your life. Let's get it right. That's Alfred Lion. Creed Taylor is an absolute genius. He is totally unique. He's beyond that kind of record producer because he has taken jazz music and brought it beyond the jazz audience. He manufactures records in a way that reaches people. He has made records for various labels, And one springs to mind, for example, and not necessarily a jazz record. It was Walter Wanderley, the organ player, a record called, I forget the, Rainforest,
On Verb.
Summer Samba for Verb. Now, what I mean by reaching people, when that record went out of print, I got letters literally for years after asking if I had the tape or could make a copy of it. When people couldn't buy it, they were going to great lengths to try to get that, and asked me whether any new records were being made. I mean, Creed has a knack of taking these people like Chet Baker, people like Paul Desmond, people like Wes Montgomery, and putting him in a, and of course George Benson, and I mean I can go on and on. What about Grover Washington? Even Bob James, for example, he brought him to new levels of even Quincy Jones. I mean,
Yeah.
Quincy was working as a record producer for Mercury Records. When Creed did Quincy, all of a sudden it was a new look at Quincy. He came to a new level through Creed. He's a genius, and he still can do it.
During the mid-60s, this country exploded with protests over civil rights and racial equality, and thus a small number of individuals attempted to comment on the socio-political environment through their music. Many sessions documenting what was then called the New Thing took place at the Van Gelder studios, including 2 Cecil Taylor Blue Notes, the Impulse Archie Sheps, and John Coltrane's later works, such as Ascension. What were Rudy's impressions about the avant-garde movement and these dates?
First thing about the Coltrane, of course I liked John very much. He was just a wonderful gentleman, and he was just great to me, and we had good times together. And he as he went in that direction, I just sort of accepted it. I have a tendency to do that, by the way, and sometimes I get in trouble with producers because of that. I can give you examples, but it's far removed from John Coltrane. But the thing about Ascension, that was, as far as I know, that was the first record, the first jazz record, if you call that a jazz record, that was made really in one take. I think that was about 20 minutes, right? So, I mean, basically that means that if once he gets that right and everything is right, we go home early because you don't have to fight to get a whole LP. So that was my first impression of that. I mean, it was not a music, it's a non-musical impression. And as far as the music, and Cecil Taylor, that has a very negative connotation to me because that was involving personalities, particularly Alfred and him. And I really feel there was a lot of extra non-musical personalities involved there. I really got sort of turned off about that whole atmosphere. To me, that was, I can put it this way. His music, not just his music, I'm talking about even avant-garde in general, so-called avant-garde, which really today is derrière-garde, as far as I'm concerned. You know what I mean by that? Yeah. It got mixed up with politics. They tried to make political statements out of the music and try to, I mean, to me, that's very inartistic. I guess a lot of people could disagree with that, but I really feel that the political aspect of avant-garde is very negative. I'm talking about the 60s now.
Yeah.
And I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I think music like this should be entertainment rather than a political statement.
As we move from the musical recollections to the more technical side of things, the inevitable questions surrounding the present war between analog versus digital recording arose. A master of the two-track analog format, Van Gelder is currently a diehard supporter of today's digital technology. But what is so attractive about digital recording?
Why is digital attractive? What is it? How can I count the ways? Starting from the top or the bottom? The most important thing or the least important thing? I mean, I'm trying to be scientific about this.
Either way.
All right, let's start about the most important feature of this digital. The single most revolutionary capability that it has is that it can be copied. You transfer the data from one machine to another, you decode the data, and you have a duplication of your first recording. In the analog world, that is totally impossible. No matter what anyone tells you, it's impossible to do that in analog. Now, no record company is going to come in, spend all those big bucks, and give the original tape to Sam Goody to sell. That tape has to be copied in order to, and duplicated in large quantities in order to be sold so that people can take the music home and enjoy it. It's impossible in the analog world to do that without losing something. Now you can say, I love the sound of that something that you lose. Many people are saying that. But you can say that all you want, but you cannot duplicate the master tape in the analog domain. It's exactly what it is, an analog. It's an approximation. Because of the nature of the way it records, machines can be built that can be manipulated, mainly from editing. You can do things to the sound to modify it or change it. If you stay in the digital domain, which do not sacrifice other things, like you can change the sound without adding noise. You can do very precise musical editing, which you cannot do in the analog world because you do it by duplicating the original tape. So you can make a totally electronic editing system instead of sitting there as I have done for years with a razor blade and hoping and sweating that you don't cut that original tape in the wrong place. And then what are you going to do? Because there is only one, unless you run multiple originals, which is Thomas Edison's idea. I mean, it's ridiculous to even think about comparing the two things. It's a totally different way of recording. Not just the original recording, but of preparing it for release, making it presentable, making it in a form that can go to the plant so that this will ultimately be on a CD without destroying the sound or compromising the sound. So it can be copied, it can be edited. History will say in the fullness of time how long these recordings last. I have a feeling that the limitation is going to be finding the machine to play the particular tape that you've made because of the format. That's going to be the rough part, because this is going to change slightly as years go on. But there's nothing inherent in the medium that says it won't last at least as long as analog. There's more. I haven't even touched upon the perfection of the recording. There's no wow or flutter if if everything is working right. In analog, there's always wow and flutter. It's just part of it. To exaggerate, if a pianist hits a steady chord or a steady note, that thing sounds like the piano sounds. It doesn't sound like an accordion. I'm exaggerating. There's none of that in the digital. Obviously, there's no noise reduction necessary. All these miserable compromises that we've had to make through all these years, the Dolbys and the DBXs and all those things, which never really worked right. They always take something away from the sound. In order for them to work at all, they have to be precisely adjusted. And if you know the pseudo-technical type of people that are in the recording business, you know that the Dolbys are never really adjusted right. They never really, some of the classical people make an attempt at it, the European types, but not in the pop or jazz field. So, those are out. Those are gone. That's history. There's more.
There certainly are more reasons to go digital. Take, for instance, the improved fidelity and presence added to decades-old recordings as they're digitally transferred to CD for reissue. However, Rudy has practically no say in the remastering of most of his work. And as a result, it was a distinct pleasure for him to recently help in the preparation of the current A&M CTI reissues, thanks to A&M's John Snyder.
This was really the first time that I was given the opportunity by John Snyder and the people at A&M to get involved with the remastering project. The Jobim Wave album, the Quincy Jones, a couple of the Wes Montgomerys. Now, those are great records, I think, and this was really the first time that I had a chance to get my hands on it and sort of give my version of what that CD should sound like. I listened to what was out before. Well, the A&M hadn't done a lot, really. There wasn't much to compare it to. But there it was. All of a sudden, we were sitting here and making CDs from analog old tapes, and I really enjoyed it. And you know what? I did it, and it's done. But if I could start all over again today, I'd do it a different way again. I could make it sound better, even than it sounds now, really. Because there's always new things happening, particularly in the digital world. That's just beginning. That is a total revolution in the way sound is recorded. People don't really understand how far-reaching that is yet. But they're comparing analog to digital, but there's no comparison. There's no way to compare it. People ask me if I'm sentimental about the demise of the LP, and absolutely not. I'm glad to see it go.
Aside from the fact that Van Gelder has little input in most of the current reissues, including the Blue Notes, Prestige, and Impulses, I wonder what his feelings were regarding the current popularity of CD reissues and about some of the more conscientious proponents of the business, such as Michael Kaskuna and his Mosaic label.
I am fairly unhappy, uncomfortable with the idea that they have coined a word for a rejected outtake and then put it on a record as if it's a great discovery. That is, the alternate takes. There is no such thing as an alternate take. It's a rejected take. They coined this word, alternate, as if it's something that was equal to the one that was released. And I've listened to it over and over again. I've listened to these things, and there, with very rare exceptions, I mean really rare, does it sound as good as the original, musically, or even technically. Sometimes I goof, and there's something that sounds terrible. It shouldn't be that way, and that's why the original people rejected it. They wouldn't put that out. Gee, it sounds terrible. Why'd you do that? Meanwhile, here it comes, as if it's something terrific. I think it's a disservice to the artist to release music that was rejected. Now, that's not just directed at Michael and Mosaic. I don't feel that way about that. I mean, all these reissues are doing that because of the extra playing time on the CD. They want to put more music, Now, I can understand why people want to hear more John Coltrane or more Charlie Parker or things that, are gone forever. But in order to implement that, what they're doing is they're scraping the bottom of the barrel. They're releasing things that were that were rejected by the artist or the record company. Mainly by the artist. If you're talking about jazz, it's really the artist. The record company didn't put anything out. So, that's my feeling about it. I have a few other thoughts about it too, but on the plus side, the fact that the music is still being made available to people is really great. And my idea of how it should be done is to do the best possible that you can. And by the way, people like Michael, at least Michael does, he really tries hard to do the best. I think they should duplicate the original record as best they can so that people can hear what it sounds like in the best possible light, and that should be it. If there's a session that was never released, if you can really honestly, from their standpoint, honestly, their kind of honesty, look through that thing and say, gee, why wasn't this put out? It's an oversight, it was planned to be done in the future, and we never got to it, or the financial reasons, whatever. Then okay, put it out if the music is good. But if it was rejected because it was a failure, an artistic musical failure, just to put it out because now it can be on a CD, I think that's wrong.
With that said, we focused our attention on Rudy's current work. Maybe not as visible as he once was, the master engineer still does his share of sessions and is currently working for many different labels, including Crisscross, Muse, A&M, Contemporary, and Uptown. Scanning the control booth, it was evident that Rudy was truly a man of the digital era. All the machines in the studio are digital. The Mitsubishi X80, a 2-track digital machine which Rudy calls the workhorse, and his new pride and joy, the Sony 3402-, which he calls the thoroughbred. Combine these machines with some vintage microphones and a studio that is acoustically correct, as well as visually correct in its construction, and you've got a sound without reproach. As we discussed Crisscross Jazz, schoolteacher Jerry Teakin's company, and Uptown Records, two of the labels Rudy currently enjoys working for, the question over analog versus digital popped up once again.
I tell you, that's a good example. Crisscross, he hates LP. Hates CDs. He doesn't like them. The fellow who runs Crisscross, he was against it. He thought that, he's waiting for it to go away. I kid him about it all the time, and I wouldn't let him up on that. He was fighting. You can't record digital, you can't edit it, and all kinds of stuff that I knew was totally untrue. No, he liked the big pictures. That's on the LP. Like to see the big pictures. Okay, so make little records with big pictures. I don't care, just as long as you put them out on CD. So anyway, he's really a reactionary when it comes to that. But I'm talking about this one individual. But meanwhile, he's making good records, and he's going to come around. He'll be all CD soon. You know.
Is that
So-
one of the current labels you
Yes.
enjoy working for?
Right. Yes. As a matter of fact, tomorrow they'll be in here. We'll be putting together a nice record that Benny Green made, the piano player with Art Blakey. It's going to be nice, right?
Is that the trio?
Gee, I don't remember offhand. It might be. I don't. But, at least now I feel that the results will be heard of all the effort. You know, they're going to come in tomorrow. We're going to spend all day putting it together. I'm going to make the master tape. We're going to send it to Europe. We're going to put it out on a CD, hopefully. Jerry, please. And people will be able to hear what it sounds like. It won't go downhill as the tape goes out the door.
How about the Uptown
Well, Uptown, they've been making some good records. That's a good, and also, of course, they've split up. You know, the two people, and now they're both making good records. Again, both of those, not both of them. One of them was pretty much on top of things when the CD happened. The other one is very much like very reactionary again against it. He didn't fights it every step of the way, makes life difficult for me. Record companies have a peculiar kind of technical illiteracy. They all seem to suffer from that. Because making records is a combination of music and technology. And there's something about record companies that do not fuse those things. I can't explain why that is, but I've detected that through the years. There's something about the record industry, the companies, not the musicians, not the technical people, the engineers, something about the minds of the record companies that seem to be unable to fuse those two elements. I mean, EMI is not Hewlett-Packard, but there's a lot of Hewlett-Packard in the records. IBM is not CBS, but there's a lot of IBM in a CBS product. But when you think of CBS, you don't think of CBS the way you think of IBM. That's pretty deep. I got to figure that out. That's the first time I said that. But I think you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Big difference between a record executive in a limo riding around listening to jazz musicians and a little guy that I work for, you know, who wants to hear some guy in a club and wants to record him because he likes the way he sounds. Big difference.
So now we know about the producers, machines, and technology behind some of our favorite studio recordings. But what about live recording? Well, Rudy's done his share, and anyone remotely familiar with such classics as Coltrane's Live at the Village Vanguard or Wes Montgomery's Smokin' at the Half Note knows that Rudy is equally capable of capturing the magic in the studio as well as in the club. Yet the nightclub stage holds infinitely more challenges than may be immediately evident.
Live recording is an extremely difficult thing to do well. Anybody can do it. Anybody can grab a machine and go into a club and record what's happening. To really do it well, it's very difficult. Every location is different. Each one has different problems. You never know what you're going to run into. The sound of these places is, you know what they really sound like. And it's really an effort. Not only that, you have to coincide your biological clock with the biological clock of the people who are working in the club. You have to go there, they do sets, they start at 9 o'clock and they end up at 2 in the morning. You have to go there and you have to peak at the same time they peak to really make it happen. At least that's what I do. I just can't do anything like just go in and do it and, you know, forget about what's going on in the musicians' world. I have to sort of be in a two-way contact with them. So that means that if I say, okay, I'll do a club date. Now, a lot of record companies like that because they get a lot of music. They get more than one album out of it, you know, and a lot of musicians are hard to pin down or when you can commit. That's another thing, by the way. They'll take a job in a club where maybe 300 people are listening, and they'll cancel a record date where there's a possibility of thousands and thousands of people will hear their music. But they think it's more important to work that club. So they make it difficult for the record company to book a record date in the studio because they got a club date. They're working a Vanguard or someplace in New York for a week, and they're lucky if there's a couple hundred people going to hear them each night. That's something I can never really reconcile, but that's the way it is. So anyway, the record companies like it because it's a way to make the musicians coincide with their schedule. So they go into a club. So they want to record maybe 2 nights. It's a lot of trouble to go through and just record 1 night, so they want 2 nights. Okay, so that means that I have to pack up this stuff the day before. I have to go into the club, do the first night, get back early in the morning. I can't do a record date 10 or 11 in the morning or even noon the next day. I'm wiped out, right? I got to go back into the club again. So I'm out of commission for 3 or 4 days, maybe even a week by the time I get this thing together, not counting the traveling back and forth. So it got to be that in order to do a remote or a location recording, I'd have to shut the studio down. I'm only one person, you know, I don't have a crew doing remotes. And also, I don't think the sound is worth the effort. Now, there are certain things that I did years ago, like in Birdland, and there was a couple of very nice ones with Kenny Durham. I think it was Kenny Durham in a club.
Bohemian?
Yeah. I mean, those things are just wonderful records. I really enjoy. Even now, I enjoy listening to them. And that's a different thing that you get in the studio. But the music was relatively simple compared to what's happening now. There wasn't a lot of difficulty in doing it.
As we wound up our discussion, our thoughts again focused on the golden era of jazz during the 50s and 60s. This was a time when almost every major jazz musician could say he recorded at least once in the hallowed halls of the Van Gelder studios. Yet few have been able to decipher Rudy's formidable skills. How did he achieve his larger-than-life horn sounds, his perfect blend and placement of each instrument, and his rich yet snappy drum and piano sounds? Well, he's not one to let the proverbial cat out of the bag, but Rudy did discuss his approach to miking an instrument, and artistic inspiration concerning certain musical situations.
Oh, I mean, every situation was different. And also, it depends on the time period. You know, I changed the way I looked at things from one time to another. Yeah, there's a difference between Kenny Clark and Art Blakey, obviously, and I had to treat him differently, which I did. And Kenny Clark was never here, actually. I recorded him in Hackensack, and we used to set him up in the corner, a certain place in the studio. It was Kluk's Corner, you know about that, right? And that's what I meant before. When a musician comes into the studio a lot, they forget their recording. It's just being almost like at home, you know. And they have a tendency to play differently than they would if they were tensed up about making records. So I would say yes. I record different musicians, even on the same, if they're playing the same instrument, in a different way. Piano players are different. Horace Silver doesn't sound like Hank Jones. Everybody knows that. On the same piano. Sometimes I would go out, you know, and I was trying things that didn't really make it, you know, and some in retrospect did, but not everything. I can't sit here and say to you everything I did I like now, or it was perfect. There was a certain, when Gene Ammons was in the studio, and he has a certain kind of a big, great kind of full, deep sound, you know. So I got caught up in that, you know. Okay, but sometimes I go too far, you know. But no, and that happens even now, even today. Well, I'll do a vocal, and somebody's got a piano player like Hank Jones behind the singer. So the time comes to mix the thing, or I'll mix it a certain way, and I'll say, "Geez, not enough piano, Rudy. You know, I don't like the piano." Now Hank has a tendency to play very soft sometimes. You know, very light, beautiful pianistic sound. I figured, okay, that's the way Hank is. I'm not going to dig in there and change things, you know. I don't want to churn up this thing. If Hank is going to play light, I'll let him. It's going to be light. So it's a little less than maybe the fellow who's responsible for making the record would like. But I go along with that. I listen to the way they are. I accept things the way the musicians play them. I have a tendency to do that. And then very often I get in trouble with the record people who are in here in the control room, you know, the record producers, because they want things to be even and you know, they want more conventional sound.
Not enough bass.
Exactly, right. If there's a lightweight bass player, sound-wise, then I know I'll kind of leave them light. I don't hate to have to dig in there and do things like that. I accept things as they are. I try to. I can't always get away with that, though. If the drummer's loud, I'll have a tendency to let him be loud. Gee, there's a lot of bashing drums around here, you know, but that's the way he plays.
Hovan.
Right, for example. Well, I mean, there are other examples, right? But, I mean, why? If a drummer has a concept, I mean, first of all, whoever the leader of the date, he wouldn't have hired him if he didn't like the way he sounds. I mean, sometimes they figure it's a mistake, you know, but most of the time I figured that band is that way because they want it to sound like that. Well, why should I change that? It doesn't always work. I can't get away with that. Something else about those old Blue Notes and records like that, too. No one really can tell how hard it was to record them because they don't know what the difficulties were. If it comes out right and there's a nice sound, it's a nice balance, I may have to fight for that, you know, under certain circumstances. There's no way to tell by listening how hard it was to get that sound. Sometimes it's easy. They come in, everything just falls in place. Sometimes you have to fight for it.
Van Gelder continues to fight for the best sound and for the respect of the musicians he records, and certainly wouldn't consider doing it any other way. And we are all the richer for it because not only do our favorite jazz recordings inspire us with their artistic excellence, but with their clean, clear, and dazzling sound that could only be supplied by Rudy Van Gelder. For current examples of his digital mastery, one need only listen to Don Cherry's Art Deco or Ralph Moore's Rejuvenate to realize that this engineer has come of age. My thanks to Mr. Van Gelder for his kindness and generosity, and Jim Golders for his technical assistance. Next week, we return to our regular days and time. For WCPN, I'm Chris Hovan. Good night.